What's up guys, Saf here on SuperSaf TV, and it's the one you've all been waiting for, the SuperSaf style camera comparison between the iPhone 14 Pro Max and the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra. We'll be looking at all aspects of the cameras, front facing, rear facing, images, video, low light, everything. There'll be some timestamps down below. Let's get to it. So we're going to start off with images from the primary camera, and both devices do excellent in good light as expected. We've got lots of detail and great dynamic range, but one thing that I consistently found was that the iPhone doesn't mind clipping some highlights in order to be able to brighten up the shadows. So in this example, if you look at the background, you can see that the iPhone has clipped some of the sky, whereas the S22 Ultra has maintained that. But if we look in the shadow areas, the iPhone has maintained shadow details better compared to the S22. Here's another example. Again, the iPhone has clipped some of those highlights in the background, but if you look in the shadow areas, the iPhone is much brighter. So they clearly handle things quite differently, but overall, I'd say that both are doing an excellent job. You'll also notice in this image that we do have some more separation between the background and the foreground on the iPhone. Things are a little bit more blurred out in the background, and that's because the iPhone is now using a larger sensor, which I do like. Now, in terms of resolution, the S22 Ultra does have 108 megapixels, the iPhone has 48 megapixels, and you can shoot at that full resolution, although that's nothing to do with sensor size, just keep that in mind. So in this example, we are shooting at the full maximum resolution of both devices, and you get a lot of detail, especially if you go in 100%. You can really see all of the intricate details of this endo skull on both devices. Now you will be able to crop in further on the S22 Ultra because of the higher resolution. Now for low light, this was quite interesting because both did perform pretty well. In this example, I do prefer the iPhone. It is just a brighter and overall better detailed image. Now in this image, things are pretty close. I would give the slight edge to the S22 Ultra, which does have more detail in the shadow areas. This image I would have to give to the iPhone. The S22 Ultra is just trying to make everything brighter, whereas the iPhone is giving you a much more balanced shot, especially if you look towards the tree with the light. It has maintained a lot more detail compared to the S22 Ultra. Now in this example, I actually struggled to get the S22 Ultra to focus, so it was giving a blurry image, and the iPhone, thanks to that LiDAR scanner, can pin in focus very quickly and easily. Now once I did finally manage to focus on the S22 Ultra, it did give a much better and detailed image, but I still think I prefer the iPhone. And the other thing that I noticed was that the S22 Ultra consistently took a lot longer for night mode shots compared to the iPhone, which opted for around 2 to 3 seconds, whereas the S22 Ultra usually went for about 6. Now on the iPhone, you can go all the way up to 10 seconds if you want, so you can manually push that. And when you do that, you do get a much brighter image with lots more detail. So overall, I would pick the iPhone for low light. Now, another thing that Apple has been talking about a lot is the improvement in the flash. Now, personally speaking, I don't use a flash on a smartphone. I just have this switched off. However, Apple has actually done really well. You can see in this example here, Samsung tends to just put a bunch of light on everything and does tend to wash things out, whereas the iPhone has a much more of a natural look. The skin tones, the black of my top and trousers, all has been maintained better on the iPhone, whereas things are looking quite blue on the S22 Ultra. Here's another example, and I actually stood further back this time, and thanks to the more powerful flash on the iPhone, it still managed to expose me quite nicely, whereas the S22 Ultra has struggled. So big improvement if you are somebody who likes using the flash. Right, now let's talk about the ultra-wide cameras. So both of these have excellent ultra-wide cameras. The iPhone is slightly wider compared to the S22 Ultra. And again, both do a really good job in general. However, the S22 Ultra, in my experience, does have better dynamic range. You can see in this example here, although both devices have blown out the highlights in the background, the S22 Ultra has maintained more detail in the shadows. And in this example in particular, you can see that the iPhone has clipped the highlights quite significantly, which I don't like. Yes, it's brighter in the shadow areas, but the S22 Ultra has, in my opinion, a better overall image where things are a lot more balanced. Now, both devices can shoot macro photos from the ultra-wide cameras, and they both do an excellent job with lots of detail. You can focus in a little bit closer with the iPhone compared to the S22 Ultra, but generally speaking, I do like the detail on both images. Here, I just took an image of my hand, and look at all the little details in my hand. I mean, both are doing very, very good. Right, ultra wide images in low light, I think both actually do really good, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max has improved compared to the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And in this extreme low light example, neither are doing great. The iPhone is a lot brighter, but that's at the expense of being very, very soft. The S22 Ultra is a tad sharper, but it's just not bright enough. Right, now one area we need to talk about is zoom. So both devices do have a 3 times dedicated optical zoom camera, but the focal length is slightly different. So the S22 Ultra has a focal length of around 70 millimeters, whereas the iPhone has around 77 millimeters. So although technically both are 3 times, the iPhone does get you in a little bit closer. However, the S22 Ultra has an additional periscope zoom camera, which will give you 10 times optical zoom. Now, if we compare this to the 10 times digital zoom on the iPhone, it is a big, big difference. The S22 Ultra is just giving you a much sharper image. The iPhone maxes out at 15 times, whereas with the S22 Ultra, you can keep going further. Here's an example at 30 times, and you can clearly read the text on this sign that I'm holding, whereas on the iPhone, it's quite a bit of a struggle. Now with the S22 Ultra, you may know that you can go all the way up to 100 times, which they call space zoom. Now, in my opinion, this is quite a gimmicky feature. If you are using it, you're probably going to be using it once every month or so. But it does work, and you can read this sign from that distance away. Let's just quickly switch back to the primary camera, which is at 1 times, and look at the difference of how close you can actually get. And although it's a gimmick, it is pretty impressive what you can get depending on the situation. Now, although you do get that extended zoom on the S22 Ultra, when it comes to low light, the iPhone just takes much cleaner images at 3 times compared to the S22 Ultra. Check out this example. You can clearly read all the text on the iPhone, whereas it's a struggle on the S22 Ultra. Here's another example. Again, on the iPhone, things are a lot cleaner and a lot sharper, whereas there's a lot of processing going on the S22 Ultra, and you can see some artifacts because of that. Now, I was a bit suspicious as to why this was, and I actually covered up the 3 times zoom camera in low light. And it turns out that the S22 Ultra in low light is not using the 3 times optical zoom. It's just using digital zoom on the primary camera. And this is the reason why you're getting much cleaner images on the iPhone. Now, it seems like because of the fact that the S22 Ultra has 2 zoom cameras, the 3 times zoom camera is just not as good in terms of the hardware compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Right, one of my favorite areas to look at, portraits. Now, both actually take excellent portraits, but Samsung has been using this AI depth algorithm, which gives you, I would say, the best edge detection on any smartphone when it comes to portraits. And in this example, it might be difficult to see, but if you do look towards my shoulder, the iPhone has struggled a little bit there. So I thought I'd go in an area where it's got a very complicated background. And here you can see that the iPhone has missed out areas between my arms, whereas the S22 Ultra has absolutely nailed this. Now, with both smartphones, you can use the 3x optical zoom lenses for portraits, which I think give you more of a flattering result anyway. And here you can see that both are doing an absolutely excellent job. Edges are pretty much perfect. You can see that difference in focal length. So although both are technically 3x, the S22 Ultra is around 70 millimeters, whereas the iPhone is around 77 millimeters. But the iPhone has a new trick up its sleeve, and you can actually take portraits at 2x, even though there isn't a dedicated 2x camera. The way it does this is it pretty much uses the middle part of that larger size primary sensor, and it actually gives you some really nice and sharp results. Now, if you've been watching my camera comparisons for some time, you'll know that Samsung actually did have 2x portraits on the S21 Ultra. However, they were really not good because it seemed like there was some digital zooming going on and the results were quite soft, whereas on the iPhone, they are using the middle part of the sensor rather than using any digital zoom, so it's the equivalent of optical zoom. Now, I'm sure Samsung could do this if they wanted with a software update and use the middle part of that larger sensor rather than digital zooming, like they're doing for low light images as well, but we'll see if they actually do this or not. Now, one thing that I do have to say is that I do prefer the colors on the iPhone. If you look at the black at my trousers and my top, those blacks have been better maintained on the iPhone compared to the S22 Ultra. Also, I'm looking a little bit more on the yellow side on the S22 Ultra. I do prefer the skin tones on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, a new feature that Apple has introduced on the iPhone 14 Pro Max when it comes to portraits is foreground blur, not just background blur. So pretty much all smartphones right now that have a portrait mode just blur out the background. Of course, if you were using a professional mirrorless or DSLR camera, there's going to be blur in the foreground as well, and Apple has tried to replicate this. And you know what? They've actually done a really good job. You can see here in this example that yes, the S22 Ultra is giving you that natural blur that you would do taking a normal shot. But on the iPhone, you can also edit this blur and you can change it to how you like, and that foreground has been blurred. This is a bit more obvious in this example. Again, you have more foreground blur on the iPhone compared to the S22 Ultra. And although the S22 Ultra has blurred some parts of the foreground, it's because it kind of thinks it's away from the subject. So that's the reason why it's blurred it. It's not actually blurred it because they are foreground objects. Right, low light portraits, something that you guys like to see as well. I think both are doing a great job overall. The S22 Ultra is brighter and it does have better edges. If you look towards my hair and my ear, the iPhone has struggled in this, whereas the S22 Ultra has got them almost perfectly. Here's another example at 1x. Again, the S22 Ultra is doing excellent in terms of edges. The iPhone has struggled towards my hair. Now, you can shoot portraits at 3 times in low light as well. And the S22 Ultra is brighter, but you might already know why that is because it's not actually using the dedicated 3 times camera. It's using the primary camera and it's using digital zoom. And because of that, yes, it's brighter, but the image is just very, very soft. Because the iPhone is using that dedicated 3 times camera, you've got a much sharper result, although it's not as bright. However, I do prefer this. Now remember, the iPhone can still do a 2x portrait, and this is using that middle part of that primary sensor, not digital zoom, and it's giving you a much cleaner result compared to what we've got on the S22 Ultra. So for portraits, it's interesting. The S22 Ultra does have the best edge detection overall, but you've got a lot more versatility on the iPhone with portraits at 1 times, 2 times, and 3 times, as well as features like that foreground blur. Right, now let's look at selfies. I think both take excellent selfies. The iPhone does, however, have more detail. Now you can get wider selfies on both, and the iPhone does have a wider angle of view, which I do prefer. And here's another example. This one's quite a tricky situation with a lot of light coming in from the background, and although both are doing pretty good overall, the iPhone just has more detail. Now looking at portraits from the selfie camera, both actually do really, really well. You can see that the separation here is excellent. Now remember when I said that the iPhone has a wider field of view for selfies? Well, this actually doesn't apply for portrait selfies. When you are taking portrait selfies, you can only take them at a fixed angle on the iPhone, whereas on the S22 Ultra, you can get that wider field of view with portrait mode, and it does an excellent job. Now, both of them do have autofocus, so you can get up really close if you want, or get in really far, and it's still gonna give you a lot of detail, as you can see from this example here. I'm not sure why I'm sharing this. Now, for low light selfies, both can use night mode, so you can get brighter selfies, although it is pretty difficult to hold it still when you are that close. And I think they do pretty well, although there's lots of processing. You can see towards my top, especially because it's black, you can see lots of artifacts there on both devices. And both also have a front-facing flash. Once again, I think the S22 Ultra does try to brighten everything up. And although you're getting a sharper result, it does look like I've kind of been hit with a lot of light. Whereas the iPhone's image is not as bright, but it's not as blinding either. Right, we're gonna move on to video, but just to quickly mention, if you're enjoying the video so far, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss future coverage like this. Now, I'd like to say that both devices do shoot excellent video. The S22 Ultra, I would say, has the best video on any Android smartphone right now. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but the iPhone is still king of video. If we look at some examples here in 4K, both are actually doing really good, but the iPhone just has overall better dynamic range, and especially in the shadow areas, you'll notice this. The iPhone also has HDR with Dolby Vision, and when this is activated, you get tremendous dynamic range. Now, the S22 Ultra can shoot in HDR10+, but this is deep within the settings, and it's got a labs sign, which pretty much means that it's a beta feature. It's not something that Samsung really seems to want you to use. And even when you do have this on, the HDR on the iPhone is still better. Now, when it comes to low light video, again, the iPhone just gives you brighter overall results. It's less shaky compared to the S22 Ultra. And when you go into super dark areas, like you can see here, the iPhone is just much, much better. The S22 Ultra does have some tricks up its sleeve. It can shoot in up to 8K, so you get a load of resolution. It, however, does crop in quite significantly when you're using this, and it completely loses stabilization. So unless you're going to be having it on a tripod, I personally wouldn't be using 8K on the S22 Ultra. Speaking of stabilization, both of these actually have great optical image stabilization. And you can see in this example here, both are doing really well. However, I would have to give the edge to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which seems to have less jitters compared to the S22 Ultra. Now, the iPhone does have a new action mode, which is supposed to give you gimbal-like stabilization, and it's something that Apple has been talking about a lot. The S22 Ultra has a similar feature, which we've had for around 4 years, and it's not really changed in 4 years. In my opinion, it's still completely terrible because it shoots at 1080p and the quality drops significantly compared to when you shoot at 4K. On the iPhone, the action mode is way more stable, as you can see from this example, and it's a lot cleaner. You've got up to 2.8K and you've got much, much sharper results. So when it comes to stability, it's an easy win for me on the iPhone. Now, for those of you who like shooting in 4K 60 frames per second, here's a quick example. Once again, I do feel that the iPhone is more stable overall. Right, slow motion hasn't really changed on smartphones for the past few years. We do have 240 frames a second at 1080p on both of these, and both do pretty okay generally, I would say. There's a little bit more processing happening on the S22 Ultra, which does make it appear a little bit sharper, but I would call it a draw overall. Now, the S22 Ultra can shoot in super slow-mo, 960 frames a second for a quick burst. This is at 720p, and the quality, once again, is not great. Like, I would never find myself using this. Sure, you can shoot that at slow motion, but there's no real reason to do that because the quality is just so bad. Now, from the front-facing cameras, I actually think both are really good for video if you are somebody into vlogging. The iPhone just does have that better dynamic range, once again, thanks to HDR with Dolby Vision. It also has more detail, especially in the shadow areas, and it's wider compared to the S22 Ultra. Now, when it comes to stabilization from the front-facing cameras, it is very, very close. The S22 Ultra might just be a tad more stable, but that's because it's not as wide. It's cropped in a little bit, which does give it a bit more scope for stabilization. Right, cinematic mode. For the intro, you saw that I was using cinematic mode on the iPhone 14 Pro Max and portrait video, which is the equivalent on the S22 Ultra. And neither of these are perfect. There's always going to be some edges that are missed. However, the iPhone 14 Pro Max can do 4K now compared to 1080p. And I would say overall, it just has sharper and better results. You can also edit the amount of blur and the point of focus after the fact on the iPhone, which you can't do on the S22 Ultra. It's all just baked in. Now, this does work from the 3x optical zoom cameras on both devices, but I just didn't find the results as good as the primary cameras. And it also works from the selfie cameras. And I did prefer the iPhone overall because you do have 4K versus 1080p. On the S22 Ultra, there did seem to be a lot of post-sharpening going on, which I also didn't like too much. Autofocus, both devices are really good with autofocus, very fast. However, when it comes to low light, the iPhone is just so much better thanks to that LiDAR scanner. It can snap on focus very quickly, whereas as you can see on this example, the S22 Ultra did struggle quite a bit. Now, it does have an infrared sensor, which I was assuming would also be used and help with the situation, but it doesn't seem to do much. Right, for audio, you guys can have a listen. Now we've got an audio test from the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra versus the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Let me know what you guys think of how they sound. Do you prefer the S22 Ultra or do you prefer the iPhone 14 Pro Max? Now, I'm no audiophile, but both sound really good to me. I would say that the S22 Ultra has better noise cancellation. If you want to go back and have a listen, there was a lot of car noise in the background, which the S22 Ultra did manage to eliminate. So to conclude, I think both of these have excellent smartphone cameras, some of the best out there. Of course, they have their advantages and disadvantages. The S22 Ultra, you have that extended zoom. You have better dynamic range on the ultra-wide camera. And I would say you have some of the best edge detection on any smartphone when it comes to portraits. The iPhone, on the other hand, I would say is a lot more consistent. It has better overall low light performance, especially when it comes to the telephoto camera. And you've got a lot of versatility, such as with the portraits being able to shoot at 1x, 2x, as well as 3x. And once again, the best video on any smartphone with excellent dynamic range, amazing stabilization, and an improved and pretty usable cinematic mode. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think? Do drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you want to see lots of images from lots of different devices, then do give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. And if you enjoyed this video and you've come this far, then do smash that like button for me. These camera comparisons take forever to do, so a subscription to the channel as well if you want to see more like this would be appreciated. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV. I'll see you next time.